topic or the title of this plenary talk is Climate Machine. And I think this is a very, very terribly appropriate topic for today. As you know, that several typhoons have been, hitting Taiwan and the Asian areas. Of course, that we can't really expect Professor Lindberg to make the typhoon go away. That's impossible. But somehow we can see typhoon and the other, this especially climate change from a different perspective. Professor Lindberg is full professor of Continental philosophy at Leiden University. And at Leiden University, she also coordinates the Leiden Center for Continental Philosophy, which organizes seminars, workshops, and conferences in the field of Continental philosophy. Professor Lindberg is specialized in contemporary Continental philosophy, especially specialized in post-war French philosophy, with a special focus on the historical background of contemporary French philosophy in terms of German idealism and phenomenology. Professor Lindberg is currently working on the idea of technology. She is, according to her online self-introduction, orienting more and more towards questions concerning ecology. She has published a series of very important articles on deconstruction and arts. For example, such important philosophers as Jacques Derrida, Jean-Luc Nancy, Philippe Lacour-Labat, and Bernard Stiegler. Let's welcome her.
Hello, nice to see you all here, still awake, perhaps. I want to thank you for the kind introduction, and I want to thank Sebastian and the whole team for wonderful hospitality here in Taipei. This has been a great pleasure. I'm going to make, I want to open a big question, and this is why my paper is necessarily going to be a little bit sketchy, but luckily we have a big conference behind us, and therefore all the necessary sophisticated details are already in your fresh memory. Therefore I can sort of surf over this memory and try to make some great outlines. Now in physics there is a term climate machine, and it is a thermal engine that gets all its heat from the sun and redistributes it on the Earth's surface through coupled fluid circulation of the atmosphere and the ocean. That's the climate machine. For us who live within this climate machine, the expression climate machine then translates into the question of the Earth's climate system, to which not only the big systems of the atmosphere and the oceans, but also the inextricable networks of all inhabitants of the Earth contribute, if only infinitesimally. As Félix Guattari says in Qu'est-ce que l'écosophie, one sense of the word machine is also for him this, I quote, cosmical machine, because certain theoreticians say that the Earth's ecosystem is equivalent to a living being or to a machine in the general sense that I give to the word here, end of quote. Today, when we think of the Earth as a natural system, we think of it very often as a climate machine. To cut a semiotic flow coming from Anti-Oedipus and to recode it into a field that it does not originally cover, we could even say that the idea of the Earth as a climate machine is the full body of our society that has taken for us the form of a noumen again, perhaps. In that case, it would be, I quote, the full body of the Earth, suffering, dangerous, unique, universal, the one, the unengendered, the pure force of engendering, element of disjunctive synthesis and its reproduction. End of quote. This dramatic terminology has become relevant since we know of the global temperature rise. Incidentally, climate machine is also a representation of the evolution of the planet's climate put online by the NASAR, so go and have a look at that online someday. The NASA image gives one possible illustration of the phenomenon we all know. The planetary climate machine is out of whack. It is out of order. It is defective and dysfunctional. You might remember that in 2015, at the Paris COP21 climate meeting, organized by the UN and the International Panel for Climate Change, IPCC, the vast majority of the countries of the world had settled as their objective that the global temperature should not rise more than 1.5 degrees above the beginning of the industrial era. Have you noticed that we have reached this limit this year? According to the recent report of Copernicus, the European Service on Climate Change, published 3 weeks ago, 2024 is very probably the first year that exceeds the 1.5 degree global temperature rise. In any case, last August was the 13th month in a row that exceeded the 1.5. Last summer's weather reports regularly showed unusually high temperatures all over the world. And these high temperatures have already caused a lot of problems for people's and nature's health. Very concretely, the Earth's climate machine is going wrong. And in what follows, I would like to test the hermeneutic force of Deleuze and Guattari's concept of machine on it. Because after all, Deleuze and Guattari's machine only works by going wrong. It only functions by failing, so perhaps it can teach us to live within a failing machine. Now, of course, in Anti-Oedipus, the machine that works well if it does not work well, that is, I quote, not limited by usury but by failure, that only works by squeaking and by going wrong, is by definition a desiring machine and a social machine, not a scientific model. But for us, the planetary climate machine is not only a neutral scientific description of complex natural processes. It is also a normative question with very complex, affective, noetic, ethical, and political ramifications. The climate to which we are used is not an arbitrary cultural norm that should always be questioned because it's a cultural norm. It is our numen in the sense that we cannot reject it unless we, who, are ready to pay the highest price. Our numen is not dictated by the gods. It's articulated by the IPCC, representing the scientists of the world when trying to sketch out the framework within which we can still live without too excessive destruction of natural and cultural milieus. We consider that the Earth's present climate system deserves to be cherished and protected, and we know that our way of life has a suicidal edge to it, to the extent that it jeopardizes and ruins Earth's climate system. To put it more brutally, we know that the contemporary mode of life since industrialization, or what Deleuze and Guattari called capitalism, whacks the climate machine. It puts it out of order, and in this sense it is suicidal. Hence the normative question for us all. Is it possible, probably not to fix the climate machine, but break its dysfunction perhaps? How to live under the condition of a climate machine? Now, in what sense is the climate system a machine? I think that our understanding of the situation and of the kind of action it calls for in many ways depends on our understanding of the word machine. Behind a simple word resides a difficult concept, one of the key concepts of our time. The climate machine is, of course, far bigger than Mumford's mega machine. It is bigger than mega. Perhaps we could playfully call it ultra machine, grown to the dimensions of an entire planet. So what is a machine? Perhaps a mechanism that repeats the same code ad infinitum. There's an online dictionary, picked among many, says, machine is an apparatus consisting of interrelated parts with separate functions used to perform some kind of work, end of quote. Science, or not actually the real science, but the expectations that structure our representations of science, uses machine metaphors of this kind. It considers that the model is functional when a structure to be explained is represented as a mechanism. Science thus aims at revealing mechanisms and their correlations, so it makes sense of the climate by thinking of it like a big if-then machine. If more CO2, then hotter air, then more floods, then more forest fires, and so on. Of course, it's much more complicated in detail, but there is this machinery working in our representations. Following, by the way, the same heuristic metaphor in the opposite direction, some crazy inventors fantasize methods of geoengineering that could then steer the climate machine to better trajectories. What I would like to suggest today is that this fundamentally mechanistic and deterministic conception of a machine is far too simple to make sense of the climate machine. It provides a model of mechanisms of the climate system and of its evolution, but it's still just a model. Furthermore, it's a model that has little to say of our effects and politics. And to get a better hold of these latter questions, which are actually my aim here, I suggest that we will try to approach this big machine with the help of a little bit of help from Deleuze instead. Because this machine is not mechanistic, but détraqué, out of order. Deleuze allows us to think the machine from its cracks and not from its perfection. And this is why I suggest it could be helpful here. So one difficulty, of course, stands in the way, on the way of this heuristic move, but maybe this difficulty is actually an advantage. Namely, the fact that Deleuze and Guattari's machine is a desiring and social machine that uses figures from natural science, but is still made for different purposes than explaining in a scientific system, a natural system. This is what I think, even though we just heard that it can also be scientifically relevant. In Anti-Oedipus and Thousand Plateaus, Deleuze and Guattari developed a general theory of machines, but it's still a theory of machinations of desire that move human societies, and not simply non-human physical entities. The machine is more than human because it includes plenty of material flows, but it is not a simple physical system. And this is why I think we can use it in this situation. Now, I don't have the time here to explain the concept of Deleuzean concept of machine, but luckily we have been speaking about it for 2 or 4 days, so that will not be so necessary either. I will just point at 2 points which are useful for the follows. Firstly, to understand a machine, Deleuze and Guattari think that the only question is to know how it works. So in this sense, at stake is not really the noun machine, but rather the made-up verb to machine. It's a dynamic process of working and functioning. Deleuze and Guattari are also much less interested in the molar machines than in the molecular microphysical functioning that can take place in machine things too, but also everywhere else. A machine puts a set of heterogeneous parts to work. To understand this, I think that it's very useful to look at Gilbert Simondon, but we already heard quite a lot about him, and so I will say just one little thing that's useful and interesting for what follows. Namely, for Simondon, it's not enough to examine a technical individual on its own, in order, for instance, a machine. But one needs to consider the entire milieu of individuation in which it takes form. Suppose that the technical individual is a computer then you see that it's unthinkable without its technical milieu, consisting of technical elements like microcircuits, and of the ensemble in which it needs to function, say, internet, all users. And every technical individual is also inserted in a social ensemble, in this case, the users of the computer network, designers, salespersons, factories of assemblage, fabrication of mines of extraction of their raw materials, and so on and so forth. All of this is implied somewhere. And now the individuation of a new technical object takes place by finding new ways of interacting with the environment of the technical object, which creates an associated milieu. Real inventions therefore imply such an associated milieu. Actually, they also invent the associated milieu without which the object cannot function, but which the object also creates. Like the invention of the computer led to the invention of the internet, but now internet has also become the condition of functioning of and inventing of computers. Similarly, in our case study, the invention of fossil-fueled energy production goes hand in hand with the emergence of the associated milieu consisting of fossil extraction and warming atmosphere and so on and so forth. Thus, the technical object interacts with a situation which conditions it and which it modifies in return. So, how does this machine work? Not at all by repeating a code ad infinitum like a clockwork. It works by inventing a line of individuation that solves problems encountered in a milieu by assembling disparate elements in metastable ensembles that create and require their associated milieus. So, for example, take the power plant. It solves the problem of lack of energy by assembling different kinds of elements like machine parts and fuel and computer programs and capital and legislation and so on and so forth. So everything changes together. And the second element of what is a machine for Deleuze and Guattari that I want to mention here is the fact that it produces. It's desire, which is production, and what it produces is not things, it is reality. And the aim of this affirmation is to conceive of the machine purely as functioning, not as a stable structure that functions. The fluidity of the machinic production becomes easier to understand when one remembers that the true model of Deleuze and Guattari's machine is not a technical machine at all, as described by Simondon, but unconsciousness. Furthermore, desiring machines are also immediately social machines, because here unconsciousness is traversed by desires animating social processes, both those interpreted in terms of information and those interpreted in terms of real production. The flows of desire traverse the society in many ways. They do not flow between already constituted subjects, but they may lead to subjectivations, as we shall see in a minute. So unconsciousness consists of the functioning of desiring machines, which are not individual expressions of individual or collective subjects, but on the contrary, and this is where you have Simondon's inspiration once again, ever-changing assemblages of different elemental desires in new metastable assemblages that can be subjectivations but are not necessarily so. And these are generated as solutions to problems of, in the pre-individual field of possibilities. Relating to their associated milieus, these encounter new problems that still new assemblages. The desire goes all through the society. So, like Simondon sees the technical individual, Deleuze sees the assemblages of desire also in terms of their capacity of creating associated milieus. There, the individual is just the provisional metastable state of a vast chain and network of states. So here what the machine would be. It's a line of individuation, it's production, it's functioning. That's all it is for Deleuze and Guattari. And how does this help us with the case of climate change? Of course, these ideas of the machine already invite us to readjust a little bit the sense of the idea of the planetary climate machine. This is the easy approach. Seen from Guattari's and Deleuze's perspective, we can think about the planetary climate as a machine, but then we do not think of it as an ideal mechanism which is stable and unitary, but as a real machine that constantly is about to tip out of its customary order, if it has something like a customary order. Of course, laws of nature apply. There are general mechanisms. We can trust IPCC. However, We do not get very far if we only see the planetary individual as a supermachine incarnating these laws. The world is not a mega subject. It's not even Gaia, even though Latour's use of Lovelock's metaphor is attractive. Surely we only have one planet, but the planet is still not one in the sense of one subject. The climate machine is not this big molar thing. On the contrary, it is this metastable assemblage traversed by innumerable microphysical flows. One important consequence of this perspective is that the unsteady state of the climate today is not a cosmic rupture with the previous stability. It is a part of a constant adjusting of a fragile system, which has always been metastable because it always includes unused possibilities that can tip to one direction or another. This, and I really underline, does not mean that we don't need to worry. On the contrary, the increasingly unstable situation is dangerous for us. But this shows that the realist way of looking at the situation is not that of a before-after type of climatic apocalyptic scenario of the end of the world that you would see in a big apocalypse films. It does not change everything in one stroke, and that's why we need a patient study of the instability. We need very patient work on the genealogies and becomings of these innumerable diverse potentialities that are evolving in the situation. The planetary climate machine assembles awfully heterogeneous elements in a hugely complex metastable situation in which diverse arrangements come and go as solutions to different productions. So we can think of ourselves as tiny agents who try to fit in this moving machinery and find better solutions to the problems we encounter, putting solar panels on the roof, eating vegetarian, rethinking transportation and that kind of things. Adaptation is the word. One can and must construct these overall views of the planet's becoming, like the IPCC reports. But one must also remember that the nature of these is that they are abstractions. They help us think, but they are not the reality of what happens. Now, this tweaking of our representation of the planetary climate system is not the most important part of our task here. The real strength of Deleuze and Guattari's idea of machines is its power of explaining the flows of desire and ensuing assemblages in human societies. And of course, by human, I do not mean here simple interhuman communities, but all kinds of assemblages of which human beings are parts, just as also other, for example, mineral, biological, technological, ideal, and so on, elements are also parts of these assemblages. The real political question for us is, after all, how do we humans relate to this climate machine, and what should we do about it, knowing that we are these tiny, tiny elements of a big, big process. To understand this, I think it's useful to examine the 6 components of Guattari's concept of machine as he explains them in Chaosmose. The first component, you might remember, is the machine's material and energetic components. We are in a materialist setting, and matter consists here of energy. The second component is semiotic and noetic. It does not consist of mental representations or individual enunciations of an identifiable subject, but of the cognitive and noetic components that enter into the construction of all machines, like diagrams, programs, algorithms, scientific theories, and so on and so forth. These elements, collective enunciations and assemblages, are more or less consciously shared by all constructors, users, and thereby elements of the machine. So, for example, the matter of the climate machine involves many gases, say carbon dioxide and oxygen. It also draws from enunciations like the scientific theories behind energy production and other theories behind the measurement of its impact on climate. The third component of the Guattarian machine are the organs, flows and moods of human bodies. These are indeed our organs and moods, parts of our individuated bodies. But these are not considered as obedient cogs of the body machine in the service of a mindful subject, but as more or less provisionally assembled elements that are traversed and animated by the material and cognitive flows we just mentioned. For example, my eye might be traversed by the light of the screen, my back by the strain of sitting on a chair, my mind by the messages I am reading, and so on. So each of these flows goes to a different direction and ties me to different assemblages. The message ties my brain to its author's brain in Taiwan, my eye to a screen made in the USA, my back to the organization of my office in Netherlands, and so on and so forth. And my body is just the intersection of all these flows. The fourth component of the machine is mental, individual, and collective information and representations. These are not scientific and technical data used in the fabrication of machines, but collective assemblages of enunciations. For Guattari, it's essential to see that such enunciations are not individual. They are kind of semiotic flows that circulate in a given society and make it into what it is. So, for instance, on my screen I share information on questions like what is Anthropocene, or why must we say global warming instead of climate change, or what is a wobbly Deleuzian machine, and so on. We share all of these. Now, these four components can be interpreted easily in the context of the climate change. Of course, our material reality is totally dependent on the energy flows that come from the climate machine and impacts it. Of course, noetic elements that allow us to use these flows in a more destructive way. Of course, our bodies are traversed by the flows of changing climate, filtered by the entire technical reality, and our minds are traversed by our knowledge of the looming climate catastrophes. But what is more interesting to us today is the fifth component of machinic assemblage as depicted by Guattari, namely the subjectivation to which all these flows can lead, and which is also a key to understanding the political dimension of situations. How do we contribute to the situation, and what can we do about it? Guattari says, the investments of the desiring machines produce a subjectivity next to its components. And Anti-Oedipus repeats this by telling that one type of machinic production produces a subject next to the machine. This time, the desiring machine does not mean a collective assemblage of enunciations, but an individual one that leads or contributes to subjectivation. Subjectivation means becoming somebody who can produce enunciations. I would even like to say someone who can speak and think and act. Subjectivation is individual in the sense that it produces a speaking and acting individual. But it's never only individual, because we can only speak and act by coding flows of matter, desire, data, and enunciations that circulate between things and people. By coding them, one is always already a part of the flow. It's primordial to understand that subjectivation can take place in two ways, like, by the way, in Foucault. Either one is subjected to the flows, or one learns to produce new subjectivity by unhooking oneself from the flows that tend to subject one. And between these two tendencies, subjectivation is an ongoing process. On the one hand, the machinic flows that traverse us tend to subject us to them, making of us simply the utilizers of the available machinic reality. And on the other hand, it's also the basis of these flows that we can learn to cut them, direct them differently, invest them elsewhere, shortly contribute to me inventing new machines. The sixth component, of course, of the machines is the abstract machine, which ties together all of these other components, material, cognitive, affective, social components of machines. An abstract machine is the counter-concept of spirit, idea of structure, that are the classical philosophical ways of thinking the laws that hold reality together. The abstract machine is the provisional, changing, transversal line that draws together all the elements of the machine that we just described. It works, yes, but it can only work by being out of joint and out of order because, as we have seen, what it keeps together is so many flows of heterogeneous elements. Being out of joint, the abstract machine and also the planetary climate machine, including our contribution to it, constantly becomes different than it was. It is neither the deterministic clockwork of modern natural science, nor the teleological gospel of climate apocalypse. It clacks and rattles, limps and repeats itself while constantly renewing itself and changing ceaselessly. So, we have seen that unlike the ideal mechanistic machine of classical science, the Deleuzian machine is always unsteady. Elle fonctionne en se détraquant. It functions in a wobbly manner, and this is why it reminds us of the climate. But for Deleuze, being détraqué, being disturbed or unhinged, upset, out of gear and out of order, and sometimes, speaking of a person, deranged, is not as such a negative term, although it can lead to both virtuous and vicious productions. The machine is out of gear for ontological reasons, because it's not deterministic and does not function perfectly. It is repetitive but with a difference. Difference is introduced in repetitions, alter it in sameness. An unhinged machine can get broken or become destructive like a forest fire, but in the end, it's precisely because a machine can get out of gear that it can also be open to invention. This happens when a machine loses access to some virtualities but manages to replace them with other virtualities that generates new kinds of becoming. Deleuze and Guattari also think that every machine produces an operator to its side, and this is how machines contribute to subjectivation. Also, the operator of the disturbed machine can be deranged, for better or for worse. And let's not now see, to end, what kind of subjectivations the climate machine produces next to it. As you can expect, two main lines can be distinguished. One is subjected to climate machine, and the other one seeks lines of light from it. Well, we have seen that here at stake is a machine is how it works. Also, the operator of the machine machines. It cuts different flows, takes part of them, directs them elsewhere. This also means producing acts and enunciations that subjectivize the agent. One aspect of subjectivation is subjection to the coded flows of society. Very much like Foucault, Deleuze and Guattari think that subjectivation can thus be subjection to dispositives of power, showing that the subject is not the origin of acts and enunciations, but results from desiring and social machines, and then can lead to machining, enunciations, and acts. That is one of the philosophical core discoveries of Deleuze and Guattari. But where is its critical and political power? They take capitalism as a starting point of their political analysis. We live in an age of capitalism. The full body of capitalism for them is money. The way in which capitalist machines function is decoding semiotic flows and deterritorializing bodies. The operator produced next to the capitalist machine is the deterritorialized worker without fatherland. While earlier social forms functioned by coding material and semiotic flows, capitalism functions by decoding them. The fundamental mechanism of capitalism is thus the unleashing of energetic and libidinal flows that codes kept in check, and the intensification of production so that capitalism is fundamentally the dispositive of unlimited production for the sake of production itself. The virtue of Deleuze and Guattari's analysis is this fruitful articulation of the logic of capitalism. Its vice is that they also seem to espouse this logic by underlining the positivity of libidinal flows, which are never wrong, and by affirming unlimited production. I don't know about you, but I have always felt uncomfortable and actually, to tell you the truth, terrified by the idea of totally unleashed libido and production without limits, which drown us in mindless images and pointless stuff. We also know that this capitalistic machine is precisely the social form that has pushed the climate machine out of order. Hence, do we have here the grey zone in which Deleuze and Guattari are actually complicit with the logic of capitalism, therefore of its consequences? Of course, the situation is much more complex, and Deleuze and Guattari's work is essentially critical. They precisely show how capitalism produces the subject that runs the capitalism, the producer-consumer, how this production amounts to exploitation of people's very bodies, and how the capitalistic mass media reality creates the mass media consumer, exploited noetically and semiotically. To criticize these tendencies, they introduce the figure of the schizophrenic as the outer limit or reverse side of capitalism, which actually reveals its fundamental character of unrestrained desire production. What capitalism does to avoid its own schizophrenic tendencies is re-territorializing the processes that it has first deterritorialized, so that flows of desire have a place where they can be safely invested. These neo-territorialities, they say, are often artificial, residual, archaic. It's very easy for us to understand what such artificial paradises might be. Holiday resorts, TV shows, internet platforms. Suddenly I think about the KonMari putting away culture. Maybe that's an artificial paradise as well. What Deleuze and Guattari seem to pay less attention to is the material side of these flows then. And they are materialist, and I claim they are not that materialist after all. Maybe like too Marxist for that. So machines are not only desiring and social. Every machine also includes material machines, which in the last instance boil down to cutting, extracting, and redirecting flows of energy. The capitalist society in which we live today is of course based on circulation of many kinds of matter, but in the end it is most fundamentally dependent on flows of energy in form of electricity. It is based on machines that cut flows of coal and petrol and uranium and wind and sun rays and so on, and code them all into pure, apparently neutral flow of electricity. Everything in the present consumer's economy is based on plentiful and ever-increasing circulation of electricity. The most fundamental desire of this society on a material level is electricity, which supports all kinds of things that we take to be totally legitimate. Air travel, heating and air-conditioned houses, food and medicine brought from afar thanks to gigantic cooling systems, computer-based communication, memory stocked on clouds that are maintained by huge data farms, and so on. And we know that while doing so, the extraction of this flow creates this toxic associated milieu, precisely the climate system now out of whack. The flow of coal and petrol that operates our computers is also the flow of carbon dioxide that heats up the climate machine in which we find it increasingly difficult to live. The carbon machine produces an associated milieu of global warming, and all of us as operators of this machine. Now, as you know, Deleuze and Guattari have also produced a counter figure to this figure of a person subjected to the capitalist system. They speak about lines of light. The possibility of flight is based on the ontological fact that we are never determined by situations, in the sense that, like Simondon, Deleuze and Guattari think that situations are not made of blunt facts, but possibilities and virtualities. We can always code and decode, deterritorialize and reterritorialize the virtualities of a situation's flows differently. This means, on the one hand, detaching oneself from pre-coded flows, and on the other hand, inventing new ways of coding and territorializing them. For such detaching and inventing to start, something generally needs to happen. A crack needs to occur. It needs to echo in subterranean strata, so that these earthquakes force to deviate the flow. This is how the very moment when something ceases to function, becomes out of order and out of joint, can also become the starting point of a new way of directing new flows of matter and noesis. Some people actually thought that the COVID epidemic would have been that kind of a crack when it comes to the climate crisis. In 1,000 Plateaus, Deleuze and Guattari famously speak about becoming child, becoming animal, and becoming woman, showing how the very thing that oppresses a minority can turn into an occasion of a different becoming. Once again, it's easier to understand this emancipatory becoming if one compares it with Foucault's description of subjectivation in Technologies of Self, in which one actually produces a new kind of subjectivity. So, can we invent minoritarian becomings that can help us in the present situation of a cracked climate machine? Could we become earthlings, like Bruno Latour puts it so nicely, il parle de terrestre? Here the problem is somewhat different than in the previous examples of minoritarian becoming, in which the task was to flee social oppression. This time the problem is to flee from oppressive material conditions, if you can call this our techno-natural environment a material condition. I suppose you can. And the particular difficulty here is that this material oppression is not lack of opulence, but on the contrary, the difficulty of diminishing it, disopulating, could you say so? To have an impact on the climate machine, a becoming must be material. It must consist very concretely in producing less carbon dioxide. This is very difficult. As Catherine Malabou says, we are addicted to fossil energy and to comfort it produces. An invitation to sobriety does not a priori sound very Deleuzian, does it? Could he want to desire less? Could he want to produce less? Or should we need to, would he want this, provided we can say it somehow in positive terms, like could we want something else than electricity? Or could we produce it in such a way that it does not produce carbon dioxide, and so on? So positive expression is, I guess, always more encouraging. Be it as it may, at the moment, every increase in green energy production is simply absorbed by the general system of energy production without really decreasing the global fossil energy production. Also, what is the political side of this flight? Flight as politics. Although Deleuze and Guattari's critique is primarily aimed at capitalism, they also show that communism, they spoke about the Soviet state communism of their time, is engaged in the same unlimited productivism, and in this respect they are certainly right. At least from an ecological point of view, both capitalist and communist regimes contribute absolutely similarly to the global warming. Today, to continue with the concepts of 1,000 plateaus, should we not think of the fossil energy-driven civilization as the state apparatus against which we should direct our war machines? And of course, in this case, we would not get anywhere by literally waging war, but by singing another ritournelle, defining new territories of life, which unhinge the goats of the present apparatus and code them elsewhere. What would be the revolutionary moment, as Deleuze and Guattari would say, that could fight the machine of unleashed productivity by crippling the fossil machine that runs it? What would be the lines of political action that push the fossil machine out of its joints in order to break the infuriated climate machine? Is it United Nations? Is it Extinction Rebellion? That are the first answers that come to mind. It seems to me that Deleuze says very little of this, but Guattari sketches out an ecosophy which is admittedly very sketchy, but which still underlines that one cannot care for environment without caring also for society and psyche, and so these must go hand in hand. We can't drop the question of society, we have to expand it. So that's all. I have tried to show here what kind of resources you can find in Deleuze and Guattari for analyzing this situation, which is that of a climate machine that is working wrong, and for working on it. Now I'd like to hear from you if this is enough. So do they provide us, and this is the first question, other resources that could turn out to be useful here? And secondly, above all, are these resources sufficient and practicable in our situation? Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Lindberg, for your very inspiring talk. And thank you also that you carefully give us a very crystal-like mapping of all those meticulous analysis all about assemblage of the climate and machine in terms of Deleuze and Guattari's perspective. And I especially happy to learn all this mapping, because the somehow it seems to me that we at last that we have, as the scholar of humanities, that we have some kind of niche to establish some kind of dialogue between the humanities and science, that somehow we can engage ourselves into the dialogue with the scientific discourse. At least to have some contribution from the humanities. The other day, only a few days ago, I received this message from the organizing committee suggesting to me that it is strongly suggested that I leave as much time as possible to the audience to engage the talk. So now I will stop here, and we will get into the next section. There will be the Q&A. So it's any questions from the floor?
It's a very simple question, because I see this kind of insane drive towards the consumption of more energy, even as the energy crisis becomes more and more severe, right? A few years ago, Bitcoin was using as much power as a country. Now machine learning is using as much power as a country, right? It's almost like this bizarre sort of battalion excess that's occurring, where we're just trying to sort of undermine the very sort of existential security of our life on the planet. And for me, that represents in turn a kind of almost a collapse, like a failed social contract or a failed sense of sort of shared meaning making in the world. And I wanted to know, there's two ways of saying this. The one is, where do you see hope in response to this? And the other way of saying it is, do you think that we need new systems of collective meaning-making that aren't reflected in the present, right? To what extent do we need to totally re-envisage the ways in which we participate in the social whole?
Well, small question. I do see hope, but it's behind effort, a lot of effort. So, well, of course, I see hope, first of all, always in young people and children, so they are the starting point, of course. But I think that another element of hope would be developing, we really need a cooperation of many kinds of developments, because we do need technological development. So either we learn to use less energy, and we should do that, but also, or we learn to produce this energy in a climate neutral manner. So it's not out of reach. It's technically possible, but it's not really there yet. We know this very well. So I think there should be technological efforts and societal efforts in this side. But secondly, and I think this is our task here, we need new means and new ways of thinking, the political and the ethical, so that we could somehow realize and do something useful with these means that we have. So I'm afraid we will need to enforce some climate policies. I don't know how to do it otherwise, but then we would need states to want it, or people to want it. We would need people to vote for it, and that's an enormous challenge. So I do think that as philosophers we should really look into the political theories we have and ethical theories, because the place of nature or place of climate in there is practically non-existent. You take Rawls, you don't do much with it. You take Plato, you take Hegel, you take whoever. And so here, what is nice with Deleuze, Guattari, and some of the later readers is that they actually take the material side more seriously. So I think there's an opening which helps us produce something. But I don't think it's sufficient. For my part, it's insufficient because it's, I don't know where to put the collective action and how to put the collective action. We are so much in resistance in this philosophy that I don't know where to put the active acting on things. So we need enormous amounts of effort. But I don't think we can spare ourselves the trouble.
Two actually very quick questions. Mm-hmm. The first is, actually I'm also kind of following up on that question of collective making a meeting. All these COP meetings, they have actually come to some kind of consensus as to what we should do. For instance, we should completely abandon fossil fuel by the year, for instance, 2030, something like that. But geopolitical concerns have actually completely disrupted these so-called consensus. Right? So the US, the European Union, they actually have kind of put off their date of completely relinquish fossil fuel, precisely because they are afraid of the Chinese EVs. They're afraid the Chinese EVs would overwhelm their markets, and so they intentionally put off their plans. For instance, let's say Volkswagen, they have put off their plans for maybe 7 years. And the US, I think maybe if Trump got elected, this plan would probably be forever tabled. So I think one thing you probably didn't completely you probably didn't thoroughly delve into it, is that behind capitalism, the capitalist machine is the neoliberal order. Capitalist machine is a sin, but the neoliberal order is behind the capitalist order machine, which actually has become the self-righteous and totally self-righteous claim as the human destiny. So this has to be, and that's why geopolitics has become so big right now, precisely because the neoliberal order has claimed itself to be the human destiny, and therefore you have to try everything to forestall the possibility that Chinese EV would overwhelm Western markets. Okay, that's the first question. maybe just a comment. But the second is actually a real question. I think that has to do with how we deal with technology, and it really fits with our theme today. It seems that it's impossible to stop technology from further developing, right? So technology itself could be a solution too, because, for instance, one of the best solutions to get rid of fossil fuel is to use nuclear energy. Nuclear energy right now is the fourth generation nuclear power plants are pretty safe now, and it will continue to develop into even more clean power resources. And so the development of technology itself could solve the problem of the problems caused by current forms of technology. That's one possibility. But another possibility has to do with that whether or not technology itself has a evil nature, which you don't see, because it continues to provide you with better solutions. But the thing is, the more solutions you get, the worse the situation gets. Usually people actually cite the example of Easter Island. The Easter Island could be actually looked at as a metaphor for Earth in the universe, because the Easter Island is like in the middle of nowhere. You can't find a very close place where you can actually seek refuge in. And I think it's a similar situation with Earth. What happened to the Easter Island? Originally we all thought it was because they just used up all the resources and therefore people died and all that. But the latest research found out that actually it was because they were able to employ some kind of technology, one after another, so that they can extend their kind of wasteful use of their resources until no more solutions could be offered. So it was actually technology itself, prevented them from seeing the problem. So I'm just asking you, what's your thoughts on this? This kind of a dilemma.
Yeah, once again, very many dilemmas. So for the first question, it was geopolitical, and I did not touch geopolitics here at all because I don't think Deleuze and Guattari are good at this. So I think it's you need other context for that. But of course, geopolitics is really at the heart of all of this. So yeah, you can say that the Americans with Trump did not fulfill their needs. Now, at the moment in Europe, in every country you can see extreme right is winning elections. Why? Because the alternative would mean cutting down consumption. So it's really, I think it's a climatic question, even though they claim it's a foreigner question. But I wouldn't forget China, Asia, India, the world's biggest producers of CO2. And then starts this big discussion that we have heard so many times in COP discussions, whether developing countries and developed countries, and what is the historical guilt and debt and role of everybody. So these are very big, very important questions that need to be dealt with and are being dealt with, but not with Deleuze and Guattari. So therefore, I jump over this, and we can't do it quickly. It's really, really very complicated because tied to history, politics, and all of that. So this is one thing. So what about how to deal with technology? I think it's clear that we cannot somehow prevent technological progress from happening. Nobody would say, let's drop technology and go back to whatever agrarian age. That was the critique of the right against the ecological movement in the 50s. So that's out of the game in a sense. But of course, what I think, to put it very quickly, my reading of nuclear power would be different from yours, because I would say Fukushima and Zaporizhzhia and Chernobyl and many other things. It's a very warlike solution for me. But I also would say that it's not, as energy companies want to make it appear, only a question of coal or nuclear. The world is open. I'm expecting a better technology than that. But what is a key question for us is that I don't think there should ever be any technology without the humanist critique of its social and political and cultural and all consequences. So technology is not neutral. We have to work on its implementation in the society and in the world in many ways, and there's enormous amounts of work for this reason. I see the time's up, so you will not have an answer to the last question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So this section we have two questions. One is whether we are hope or not, and the other one is about the evil technology. So as the host of this section, I try to be a bit optimistic. So if we were Pandora, whether we would open the box, if she knew in the first place that there is evil technology inside the box. But there is a hope unless we open the box. So get the box open, and we need to be courageous enough to wait patiently for the hope to come. Thank you very much for your participation. Thank you.
Thank you.
you.